Hello, I am the Nerdy Chaplain, and this is a sermon from the archives. It is called Two Houses Unfinished. It is based on the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 28 to 33. It was first preached at a Congregational Church in Connecticut on the 16th Sunday after Pentecost in 2016. There were a lot of Herods in Jesus' time, so much so that the name almost took on the same meaning as the name Caesar did to the Romans. Luckily, the New Testament only describes 4 of them. There is the Herod that sat in the trial of the Apostle Paul, his father, the Herod who persecuted the early church in Jerusalem, then his uncle, the Herod who played a part in the trial of Jesus and the execution of John the Baptist, then his father, Herod the Great, the first Herod, who was the king when Jesus was born. Herod the Great was appointed king of Judea by the Roman Senate, and he wanted to be remembered always and sought lasting fame by undertaking many massive building projects. He built an entire Roman city. He built public buildings, aqueducts, roads, and palace fortresses in and around Jerusalem, including the famous Masada. Yet, most of these have vanished to time. He also started work on one of the largest construction projects of the first century, the restoration of the Second Temple. After the Persians ended the Babylonian exile, they helped rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, but it had been damaged heavily by Alexander the Great and his successors, the Romans, and rebellions. So Herod went to the priests on Mount Moriah with a plan to restore the Second Temple and expand the complex to at least double the size, while allowing the rituals and sacrifices to continue uninterrupted. He expanded the platform that we know now as the Temple Mount so much it absorbed a neighboring hill, building many vaults to hold up this platform, which is also a basis of the legends about a hidden treasure under the temple. During one of Jesus' visits to the temple during Passover, it is reported that the construction had already been going on for 46 years. In fact, when this temple was destroyed by the Romans, Herod's full plan wasn't realized. It was not fully completed. Jesus grew up surrounded by incomplete building projects, especially the temple. This probably is why Jesus used the imagery of building projects to illustrate his parable of the tower builder. Jesus' parable is about the cost and responsibilities of discipleship, warning us against any light-hearted assumption of responsibilities of being a disciple. He is telling us that we must consider first the cost and what it will mean, and what is in our nature to bear. Jesus is challenging us to consider, what does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Religious architecture is a favorite topic of mine. My senior honors thesis studied the Congregational Church architecture in one of the counties in Connecticut. My work-study job in the seminary was as the religious art and architecture slide librarian. And I hardly ever pass up an opportunity to visit a cathedral. I also love the quirky little stories that come from the construction of houses of worship. There's this town in northwest Connecticut where if you stand in front of the Congregational Church, a gray church with blue doors, then look across the street at the Catholic Church, St. Francis. See if you notice anything a little off. When they were building St. Francis, they looked across the street at Center Congregational Church and said that they could not let a Congregational Church have a taller steeple than them. So they built that odd mound, an odd mound underneath the church to raise the foundation, and their tower is disproportionately large compared to the rest of the building. All that to have a higher steeple than the church next door. There is a similar story connected to the cathedral that I have visited most, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. In 1887, the Episcopal Church in New York City decided that they needed a cathedral to rival the Catholic Cathedral of St. Patrick. Even though it is still not completed, it is the fourth largest Christian church in the world. Don't get me wrong, I find it amazing and an awe-inspiring house of worship, but the motivation behind it, like that of the steeple of St. Francis, does not seem to reflect proper Christian discipleship. Cathedrals can require a massive amount of resources and is not an endeavor to be taken on lightly. Like the builder in the parable, you have to make sure that you have all the resources to complete the project before you start it, or you risk being mocked for not being able to complete the project. Even with modern building materials and equipment, St. John the Divine is still not completed. And there hasn't been any significant construction since 1997. In fact, due to a fire, it's actually less completed now than it was the last time I was there. It has been nicknamed St. John the Unfinished. There was also a period of almost 40 years in the mid-20th century where construction had halted. The bishop had decided to call a halt to the construction because he felt that the resources would be put to better use by addressing more charitable needs in the city. Now that, in my opinion, is a better response to Jesus challenging us to consider what it means to be a disciple. As Jonathan Edwards teaches us, motivation matters. Engaging in a huge project like construction to such an extent with the motivation of gaining fame, like Herod's construction of the Second Temple and all his other projects, or of being more grand than the other house of worship down the street like St. Francis and St. John the Divine. It corrupts the project. It misses the whole point of what Jesus has called us to be as his disciples. Being a disciple is not making the prettiest thing in an attempt for self-glorification, but by responding to Jesus with love in our hearts and the most effective use of our God-given gifts to help others. That motivation is the best one to have when we go out and build our towers. Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Our Maker, inspire us to build towers with great foresight. Grant us the wisdom to consider our resources, finding them sufficient to complete our projects before we even begin them. May our motivations be pure, pushing down any selfish pettiness that may try to impose itself, knowing that we serve your glory and not our own. Amen. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy. And now may the light of God guide, inspire, and protect you in all that you do this week. Go in peace.